Hello, everyone. Welcome to Audit Vault and Database Firewall Release 20. That's our topic for the Ask Tom Database Security session this month. I'm Russell Lowenthal, Product Management for Database Security, and I'm joined today by Ashok Swaminathan, who is a Senior Director of Product Management, also Database Security, and specifically Ashok is in charge of Audit Vault and Database Firewall. So thanks for joining us today, Ashok. Just a reminder that this call is being recorded, and I'll usually have the recordings up on the Ask Tom page about a day or two after we finish the session. They got to go through some post-processing stuff. We do these sessions just to give you a direct channel into product development. It gives us a way to make product announcements like the ones we'll make in a few minutes here. It also gives us a way to keep informing you of changes that we're making in the products and new directions that we're going in. We do these every month, second Thursday of every month, and welcome to all of you that have joined us today. And before we get into the technical conversation, just a couple of one really real quick product announcement, and that is on Oracle DataSafe. On the 11th, so Tuesday, 2 days ago, we made Oracle DataSafe available for on-premises databases. So as of now, you can use DataSafe really anywhere. It can be Standard Edition, Enterprise Edition, Exadata Cloud at Customer, doesn't matter. You can use DataSafe if your database is on-premises. If you're running in the cloud, of course, it works with Autonomous Database, with Exadata Cloud Services, and with the standard database service, regardless of whether they're virtual machine or bare metal. We also have begun a limited availability program for on-premises database. The generally available is connecting in with either VPN Connect or Fast Connect if you have that set up between your data center and the Oracle Cloud infrastructure. The limited availability, the one that just kicked off this week, is using the on-premises connector. On-premises support is in most of the data centers for Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africa, and of course, North America, including both US and Canada. If we take a look at the DataSafe page, we'll see in what's new up here, something that lets you know what regions we're using DataSafe. Our DataSafe is available on-premises in, how you can use DataSafe with private VCN access, and very important, the limited availability program for that on-premises connector. If you log into the DataSafe console, you will see the exact same note. It's going to make me log in again. With the exact same links. So we've got it, trying to put it in front of you in multiple different places to make sure that you don't miss it. When you go out to look at which regions, if you click that first link, that'll take you here where you'll see which regions we're offering private endpoint connection for. On-premises connection, and if you click the link for the on-premises connector, the limited availability connector, this will walk you through how to register for that program. And basically all you're going to do is create a service request that we enable this in your tenancy, and you can immediately begin using this. Usage of it, very, very easy. It's a simple matter of downloading basically an agent that you install on premises somewhere within your data center that can connect to the databases, and DataSafe is able to reach out through that agent over TLS, obviously, and connect into your databases for getting audit data masking, all the things that it does for you. So again, you'll see that both here in your DataSafe console and in the DataSafe cloud page. All right, so let's go back over here. In the support corner, this month's topic is Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20. If you're getting ready to deploy Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, there's 2 support notes that you need to know about. One of those, and this one is hugely important, is 209.268.3.1. This particular support note is the best practices and sizing calculator for Audit Vault and Database Firewall. And if you scroll down to the very bottom of the note, you'll see a link to download the sizing calculator. This has been true all the way back since 2004 when we first started providing Audit Vault as a product. The number one issue that our customers hit around Audit Vault and Database Firewall is undersizing the Audit Vault server. So do your homework up front. It'll make your deployment go a lot simpler. Another note you should be aware of is the master note for Audit Vault and Database Firewall. That's note 216.965.3.1. It's just your list of notes, topical issues, what's going on for Audit Vault and Database Firewall. Support updates these master notes frequently. Okay. When we released Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, we released a completely rewritten set of documentation. There's a ton of information in there. There's two areas that I want to call your attention to. One of those is the release notes. Now, I'll be honest with you, I normally give the release notes a very cursory look. I don't usually take a lot of time with them, but in this case, there's a lot of information in those release notes. We give you a listing of what's new in Audit Vault and Database Firewall, the up-to-date compatibility matrix, and a list of all issues that we know about so you can know what's going on before you install or upgrade. So I recommend you take a look at the release notes. One of the things that we've done, and we'll talk more about this as we get further along in today's session, is we have greatly simplified the use of the database firewall and especially policy creation for the database firewall. If you're not already familiar with database firewall and creating policies for it, we put a lot of work into updating Chapter 2 of the Concepts Guide. It gives you some tips and describes the flow for creating a Audit Vault and Database Firewall policy. Okay. So that's it for announcements. Let's get into the technical session. We started down this journey with Audit Vault and Database Firewall all the way back in 2004. It's hard to believe it was that long ago, but that was when we first released Oracle Audit Vault. And Oracle Audit Vault back in 2004, the version number was 10 because at the time, products that we released would follow the database version. In 2004 was the time of Oracle 10. So when we released Audit Vault 10.1, what we released was basically a specialized data warehouse that you could install wherever you wanted to. And that data warehouse had some tools built into it to extract audit information from different types of databases. It could be Oracle, SQL Server. You know, there were a couple of different databases that we worked with. Well, no, I take that back. Actually, it couldn't be SQL Server back in 2004 because that was before SQL Server had an audit facility. So I'd have to go back and look at my notes. It's been so long. But anyway, it would extract that audit data and move that audit data into a data warehouse for analysis and reporting. And Audit Vault was a fairly successful product for us. We released 10.1 in 2004, and then a couple of years later, 10.2, and then 10.3. And 10.3 was the last release in the Audit Vault 10 product family. About 2 years after we released Audit Vault version 10, a company called Sekerno released a product called the SQL Firewall. And the SQL Firewall had a really innovative approach to monitoring activity within a database. Sekerno would go out and it would look at the network traffic going to the database, and it would pull everything that was headed for the database into Sekerno, and it would basically decode the packets and do a parse of the SQL that it found. And when it parsed that SQL, it could tell you, well, this is a select, this is an insert, this is an update and delete. And the information that Sekerno would pull off the wire, it would dump into a database for analysis and reporting. We liked this technology so much that in 2010, we acquired Sekerno. And when we acquired Sekerno, they had released version 1 in 2006, then version 2, version 3. In 2010, they were up to version 4.2. I think we did this acquisition fairly early in that year. Shortly after acquiring them, we released Oracle Database Firewall 5. That's what we renamed the SQL Firewall to. And for about a year and a half, because Oracle Database Firewall 5 came out early in 2011, For about a year and a half, we ran with Oracle Audit Vault, which would collect information from database audit trails and put that into a repository for analysis and reporting, and Oracle Database Firewall, which would collect information off of the network for analysis and reporting and put it into a database that was on the Oracle Database Firewall. Needless to say, there's a lot of overlap between those two products. If you look at it, both of them are monitoring activity in the database. Both of them give you the ability to generate reports and alerts. And there was a lot of question about which should we use, one or the other. And the reality is you kind of need both. You need the audit picture and you need the network picture to really get a complete look at what's going on. And so very shortly after the acquisition of Securno, we began to combine the two products into a single product. And on December 12th of 2012, so the date was 12/12/12, we released Oracle Audit Vault and Database Firewall version 12.1. So version 12 on 12/12/12, that's when it came out. I'll never forget that date. Yes, there may have been some pressure to get it released exactly on that day, but the development team came through for us and we were able to do that. But what Audit Vault and Database Firewall did is it combined the functionality of the old Oracle Audit Vault and the functionality of the old Oracle Database Firewall into one product. They use a common repository starting with 12.1. They use a common reporting framework. It was really a nice step forward for database activity monitoring. We continued with the 12 release through 12.2, which we released in 2015. And along the way, there were bundle patches. So there was a 12.1.0.2, 3, 4, same thing for 12.2, until just last month when we released Oracle Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20. So current release, Oracle Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, and that's what we're talking about today. Okay, so now you know the history of it. Let's take a look at what Oracle Audit Vault and Database Firewall does. Basically, it's just like I already told you. If you look at it from a high level, there is an Audit Vault server. On that Audit Vault server is an Oracle Enterprise Edition database that is configured as a data warehouse. There are Audit Vault agents that go out and they will scrape the audit data from databases. We support a wide variety of databases. We will also pull the audit data from the operating systems that the database is run on. You really need to have that whole picture to know what's going on. Because so many databases use Active Directory for authentication and authorization, we go ahead and pull the audit information out of Active Directory. And we give you the ability to very easily create custom collectors for things like application audit trails, or really for anything that produces audit in a standard format. The other piece of Audit Vault and Database Firewall is that Database Firewall piece that sits out on the network. It monitors the network traffic through for a couple of databases, Oracle SQL Server, DB2, Sybase, and MySQL. And as it sees information coming over the network, it plucks the SQL off of the network, parses that SQL, analyzes it, and sends its information down to the Audit Vault server. So at a high level, there's not a lot of change between what we did in Audit Vault and Database Firewall 12.2 and Audit Vault and Database Firewall 12.1. If you look at the detail, there's a few extra databases listed here. We'll get into that in a few minutes, but at a high level, the product functionally works very much the same, okay? Now, what's new? Probably the first thing you're going to notice if you've been using Audit Vault and Database Firewall for a while is that when you log in to Audit Vault and Database Firewall, the user interface is completely rewritten. We went back to the drawing board. We brought in user experience experts that took a look at how does the clickstream flow go back in Audit Vault 12.2. What were the common operations people had to do? And we really spent a lot of time optimizing the flow and optimizing the user experience here. So here you see an example of the login page, and I'm logged in as an auditor, and everything from the dashboards where we spent, we got rid of some of the stuff that was not so interesting and we really focused on what you do care about. If you were on a few minutes before we joined, you may have seen me going through and checking frantically, make sure I didn't log myself out. But we show you which targets there are, which ones are using Firewall or Audit or both. We show you how our audit trails are doing, any alerts that are coming in, what our targets are and what the number of operations for those are, who our biggest users are, and the activity. If we look at the admin console, again, we see the things that an administrator cares about. Is my system up and running? I can see that with just a glance. My agents are up, my audit trails are up, got my targets set up here. Am I okay on disk space? I'm not even halfway on disk space. Life is good. All my firewalls are up, and my CPU usage, I did have a little bit of a spike, but that has lowered down to a reasonable level now. So you get a good look and feel for what's going on for the auditor or for the administrator. But where you're really going to start to see a difference is as you start to get into some of the places where in older versions there was a lot of clicking around. Let's pick an Oracle database as an example. Now, when you go into an Oracle database target, everything you need is on one screen. Do you want to look at audit policy? One place to retrieve it. Do you want to look at user entitlements? One place to retrieve it. Stored procedures? One place. By the way, you could retrieve all of these back in Audit Vault 12.2, but you would go to a different screen for each one. And notice that these are schedulable. We can retrieve, or we can schedule retrieval. So it's no longer I have to remember to do it. We can say I want to go out and retrieve audit policy every hour, every day, every week, every month, whatever meets your needs there. We manage audit data collection and database firewall from within the same page. We select our retention interval from within the same page. Everything in one place. A whole lot easier to deal with than what we used to do in Audit Vault 12.2. Okay. We changed the database firewall. Back when we first acquired Secuerno, as I mentioned, Secuerno had its own database. It would pull information off of the network. It would dump that into the database for analysis and reporting. When we moved the products together, we retained that database on the database firewall. So if you look in an Oracle Audit Vault and Database Firewall 12.1, the firewall component, there's an Oracle database on there. If you look in 12.2, there's an Oracle database on there. Here's a dirty little secret for you. We didn't really need that database. We kind of left it in there just because that's how we'd always done it. But as we went to Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, we thought about the resources that Oracle database was consuming, CPU, memory, maintaining it, and it was just kind of silly. So we have pulled that off of the firewall, and now you have more of the firewall server's CPU, memory, and RAM to dedicate to the job of monitoring network activity. We also, in earlier versions, had a separate console. Now, you never used that console for anything. You would use it when you installed your firewall and to do the initial pairing of the firewall with the Audit Vault servers that it was working with. Well, why have a completely separate console that gets used once? So what we've done in Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20 is the console is gone. That, again, returns resources to the firewall server. It also closes a point of access to the firewall server because now there's no console. There's no longer any way someone can log into that firewall server and try and do something with that console. So a lot of improvements to the database firewall in addition to the simplicity of use that you're going to see a little bit later on. Another place where we've done some work is around target support. Since 12.2 came out, we've constantly been working with our targets and adding new targets and removing old targets. But with Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, we took the opportunity to add in support for Postgres. Postgres has been growing in popularity. A lot of people are using it. We had several customer requests for it. So that is now included with Audit Vault and Database Firewall, built-in support for Postgres. No matter how many different types of databases we had pre-built collectors for, we would always find a customer who was using something we didn't have a collector for. And what we've done for many years is we've tried to give you the ability to easily add custom collectors. And in Audit Vault 12.1, 12.2, you could take really anything that wrote its audit trail to a database table, and with just a simple little mapping that says, you know, this column in the table is the event ID, this is what says what was done, this is the time column. You could just map the data elements in the audit trail you were trying to pull in to your Audit Vault schema. Well, That worked for database tables. It worked for XML. In Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, we've expanded that custom collector framework to include JSON and REST. So if you have something that writes its audit trail to a database table, or to an XML file, or to a JSON document, or that makes its audit data available to you via REST API, then no matter what it is, Audit Vault and Database Firewall can bring that in and configure that as a target. If you think about those four technologies, table, XML, JSON, REST API, that covers almost everything. Yes, there's still a little bit of legacy tech out there that writes audit data out in a proprietary format. And if you really need to bring something like that in, which hopefully there's not a lot of cases where you do, but if you've got something really old out there you need to get, we also include a Java SDK, which lets you go get non-standard stuff. Another change that we made in terms of target support is we redid how we were doing transaction log monitoring. A lot of us refer to this as before and after value collection. This was a capability, goes all the way back to Audit Vault 10, but it's the idea that there are certain columns in the database or certain tables in a database where you want to exercise data governance. You want to track the life cycle of data within those tables, so that from within your Audit Vault and Database Firewall, you can go in and run a report that says, for this table, someone changed this value to that value on day 1, and then they changed that value to this new value on day 2, and then that value to this value on day 3, so that you can see the life cycle of the data. Now, before and after value collection, prior to Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, was handled using Oracle Streams. Streams is great technology 15 years ago, but Streams has gotten a little long in the tooth. It's difficult to troubleshoot. It's very complex. And let's face it, we've got better technology for doing this type of work at Oracle, and we have had for several years. So with Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, we've switched to that better technology, and we now use Golden Gate to capture changes instead of Streams. Don't worry, this isn't a trick to try and get you to go out and buy Golden Gate. We not only switched our before and after value collection to Golden Gate, we also worked with the Golden Gate team, and we include Golden Gate restricted use license with your Audit Vault and Database Firewall. So that means that for those of you that are running Audit Vault and Database Firewall 12, when you upgrade to Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, if you want to take advantage of this new capability, you don't have to go out and buy a separate license of Golden Gate. It's included, even though you're just upgrading to Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20. Let's take a closer look at how this works. And I will tell you why I'm so happy about this as we go along. Left-hand side, somebody goes in and does a DML operation, insert, update, or delete. Database handles that insert, update, or delete. Database writes out a redo log. All of this is normal, standard database stuff. You've made no changes to the target database. This is just how databases work. We hand off from the database to Golden Gate. Now, we worked with the Golden Gate development team, and when Golden Gate 19.1 was released, this is 14 months ago, I think, when it was released, it included a new output format called XML Audit Vault. So Golden Gate mines redo logs, and as it's bringing its change data in, it can spit that out into an XML document. This is standard Golden Gate functionality. The fact that you're using that one XML audit format, that's the only thing that's different, but that's not special. That's just a part of Golden Gate from 19.1 on. Now Audit Vault takes over. We've got an Audit Vault agent. Audit Vault agent picks up those XML documents that Golden Gate is writing out. Audit Vault collector reads those XML documents in, sends it up to the Audit Vault server where it is available for before and after values reporting. Let's take a look at this. We're going to start with Golden Gate, assuming that I can actually spell the password properly. Uh-oh. I'm remembering my password wrong. I am remembering my password wrong. Darn it. Sorry. I've got so many test environments. And of course, being a good security person, I use a different password for each one. So let's see if I can manage to get this. There we go. Okay. Darn security. All right. So we've got our system up and running now. Sorry, go back here. This is the Golden Gate admin console. And what we've got is one transformation. We're pulling from the database. In particular, I'm going to a pluggable database. And the transformation that we're doing is saying, I want to pick up any change that is made to the HCM schema. So if any change is made to a table in the HCM schema or any DDL that includes an object name for the HCM schema, I'm going to pull that information from the database through Golden Gate into my XML file. That is going to be picked up by an audit trail within Audit Vault and Database Firewall. So here we have our transaction log audit trail that is going to the directory where we wrote that file. We pull those XML files into the Audit Vault. It goes into the schema, the audit repository, and it's now available for reporting. If we go to our before and after values report, we are able to see somebody named Sis has updated the employees table, and they changed the phone number column from this value to this value. They changed this phone number from this value to this value. And if we scroll down, we did a global update on that table, it looks like. Go a little further. Somebody also changed a credit card salary value from one value of salary to another value. So somebody got a raise here. They got their salary lowered here. And as with anything in Audit Vault and Database Firewall, if we click into it, we can get more detail about exactly what was done. So it was updated. Here's the time that it was updated. Here's the user that did the update, the command class they did, everything you need to know, including the session ID, just all you need to know about what happened within that process is visible to you in that Golden Gate. Now in that audit report. Here's why I'm such a big fan of this change in the architecture. One of the things that we get involved in as product managers is support escalations. And support, my heart goes out to the people in support, but supporting the old architecture was actually quite difficult because it was very complex, and there were changes that were done in the database that were just for Audit Vault and Database Firewall. So if you filed a service request for streams for Audit Vault and Database Firewall, the streams guy you were talking to wouldn't really know what special had been done for Audit Vault and Database Firewall. So it was really a problem. Here we have very clean support guidelines. You have the piece the database does, data change, target database, redo logs, the piece the Golden Gate team does, Golden Gate to XML. And once it gets to XML, Audit Vault and Database Firewall picks it up and runs with it. And this is just really, really much easier to support. And that Golden Gate server does not have to run on the database server, which means if I'm trying to move a lot of data through that pipeline, I want to pull in a lot of changes in, I can actually have a dedicated server just for doing the processing and the transfer to XML. Just a much better, much more scalable architecture. Let's go back to targets. I'd mentioned that we had some new ones. So Postgres, MongoDB, these are new in Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20. For custom collectors, JSON and REST, this is new in Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20. I want to remind you, I told you about the release notes and how it had a list of supported targets. Do remember that that is the start, not the end. Almost anything that writes an audit trail is going to write that audit trail in database table, XML, JSON, or REST. If it's doing that, Audit Vault can work with it, okay? So if you need to go support RustDB, I have my own database, by the way. It's called RustDB. It's the best database on earth for people who want to monitor their cups, and track any chips in their cups. If you have RustDB out there, it turns out RustDB writes its audit trail out into JSON. RustDB isn't listed here, but because it does its audit trail in JSON, easy to work with, okay? Next thing that's new, for the database firewall, prior to Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, if you were monitoring a RAC database, you had to define every local listener within the database firewall. It had to know the network address for every local listener so it would know what to monitor. With Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, we've made that easier. All you have to do is tell Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20 where the scan listener is, and we pick everything else up from the scan listener. Much easier to work with. We've also improved policy creation in Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20. If we go out and we look at our policies, okay, let's just pick, not regular policies, we want to look at database firewall policies. If we go out and we look at our policies, what we see is the same concepts that you had back in the old Securno days, 12.1, 12.2, because it's a really good concept. It's a very capable product. But we've done things in a little bit better layout and used a little bit more common sense terminology. One of the things you can do with Audit Vault and Database Firewall policies is you can base policies on session context. What IP address are they coming from? What program are they running from? What database user did they try and log in as? What operating system user did they run as? Well, these are all contextual to the session. And so in 20, we call it session context. Back in 12.1 and 12.2, we called these exception policies. A little bit easier to understand. SQL statement, that's kind of stayed the same. But in 12.1 and 12.2, you could write policies that were this table or this action. So I want to do this if I see an update, or this if I see a delete, or this if I see something on the employee table, or this if I see something on the credit card table. We called those novelty policies in 12.1 and 12.2. But in Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20, we call them database objects, which makes a whole lot more sense. So you'll see policy creation a whole lot easier just because everything is named with a more common sense look, and everything, again, is on one page. You're not going hither, thither, and yon as you configure your policies. A lot easier to work with. We've improved how we integrate within the enterprise. Most of the time when you get an Audit Vault and Database Firewall installation, you're going to have 1 or 2 administrators, maybe 3 or 4 auditors. You know, that's the norm. But we have some customers with a whole lot of databases. We have customers with 10,000, 15,000, even one customer with 25,000 Oracle databases, single customer. Their Audit Vault and Database Firewall installation is pretty darn big, and they have hundreds of people logging in to the system. So they've been asking us for a while, can you integrate Audit Vault and Database Firewall with Active Directory, because we don't like having to maintain separate users in the Audit Vault. Well, we've done that with Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20. If you go into Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20 as an administrator, go to Settings, go to LDAP and Active Directory configuration. You can configure it to work with an LDAP server, with Active Directory, really with pretty much, you know, well, the normal database repositories, okay, or the normal identity repositories. We've also given you the ability to automate archiving. Now, Audit Vault for years, this goes all the way back to 10.4, has had the concept of we're going to collect data. Hang on. Oh, wrong interface. I need to be in as the administrator. We're going to collect data, and when we collect that data, we're going to set up a retention policy for it. We'll have so many months when the data is online in the database for easy query, and as the online interval has passed, we will move that data out of the Audit Vault database. You know, we want to keep the database a little lean, easy to query, not having to go through too much data, and we will move it into archive. The idea behind archive is I probably don't need to see that too often, But when I do need to see that data, I can always retrieve it from archive, and I can go out and bring that back in, run operations on it, and then move it back out to archive again. Previous versions of Audit Vault, that process of managing the move from online to archive was manual. You had to go off and define what your archiving locations were going to be. We do that here. So we could do SCP or SMB, which is Windows File Share, or NFS. You define your archive locations, and you then go through daily, weekly, monthly, however often you're going to do it, and you go through and say, I want to run my archive process, and things get copied off, and you do that. So really, really nice to have automated archiving. Oops, go back one, sorry. One other thing I kind of want to bring to your attention is Audit Vault is a data warehouse. Underneath this is a big enterprise edition database. We have customers with 40 terabyte audit data warehouses, because if you're bringing in audit information from a lot of different databases, even if you're only retaining a month or two online, that can get pretty big pretty quickly. Remember I said sizing is one of the biggest customer issues. They get the sizing wrong, and then of course performance is terrible. And why is performance so bad? Well, it's because you're running a 40 terabyte database with a single CPU and 10 gig of RAM. Anyway, lot of storage there. Not everybody has 40 terabytes of local storage. We added support for fiber channel SAN back in Audit Vault 12. I think it was bundle patch, I want to say bundle patch 6, maybe Rajesh or Ashok, but either way, it's been a while now. But when we was it bundle patch 5? I knew it was somewhere around there. But when we added support for fiber channel SAN in, we added in single path, because at the time that we were developing it, this is what our customer advisory board told us was the most common. Well, we released the feature, and right away we get, yeah, but single path is kind of old. We want to use multipath. People want to use multipath because I have multiple paths to the SAN or over the network. That way, if one of them fails, I still have connectivity. And if they're all up, I have increased throughput. So we've taken the opportunity, since we're doing some re-architecture anyway, and Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20 includes multipath support for fiber channel SAN. If you're running Audit Vault and Database Firewall now and you want to upgrade to version 20, you have to start from Audit Vault 12.2, bundle patch 9 or higher. The current bundle patch for 12.2 is bundle patch 12. So if you're running 12.2, bundle patch 9, bundle patch 10, bundle patch 11, or bundle patch 12, you can upgrade directly from your current version to Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20. If you're running an older version, that could be 12.1, that could be 12.2, bundle patch 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you're running something older than bundle patch 9, it's a two-step process for you. You're going to have to upgrade or apply bundle patch 9 or bundle patch 10 to your current release. And then once you're at BP 9 or 10, you can begin your upgrade to Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20. There's a really good chapter in how to do your upgrade, how to plan out your upgrade in chapter 6 of the installation guide. And don't forget that MOS note that I referred you to earlier on. You can just search for Audit Vault Sizing Guide. You do want to make sure, especially if you're doing a new installation, that you size that new installation appropriately. You'll be pleased to know, by the way, that the sizing for Audit Vault 12.2 is pretty much the same as the sizing for Audit Vault 20. So if you've already got a good system, if performance is working well, you don't have to use this time to replatform if you don't want to. But in this morning's session, we had about a quarter of the people who plan to deploy right away. And probably a lot of the reason for that is the current release, 12.2, that does come out of support early next year. So, you don't want to wait too long to upgrade. But if you were going to deploy this month or next month before we release the first bundle patch, we would like to know, and we would like to work with you during that process. So we've created an email alias called AVDF20 launch www group at oracle.com. I have no choice. The underscore www group is required by our internal processes. But if you're going to install or upgrade Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20 this month or next month, please send us an email. This doesn't go to sales. This doesn't go to anywhere but development. And the reason we want to know this is we're going to email you back and we're going to say, would you like to have regular weekly calls with us just to let us know if you're running into any issues, or where we can share issues if we hear them from other customers. We spent a lot of time on quality assurance for this product, multiple cycles getting it as right as we possibly could. But the reality is it gets out there in the real world with very varied environments, and there's always a couple of lessons that we learn afterwards. So we want to make sure that if we find something and you're working on this before we get that first bundle patch out, we get you that information as quickly as we can, and we don't leave you struggling to figure out something that someone else has already figured out. So please, again, if you're thinking of doing this month or next month, take a screenshot, write this down, you know, whatever works for you, but do go ahead and send us an email and let me know. All right. I'm going to give you a freebie here. This is the most common issue we are facing right now. Most common issue that we're facing right now, we've probably had 6 or 7 customers that have complained about this just in the last couple of weeks. And basically what they're getting is they go to do their install. They've downloaded their Audit Vault and Database Firewalls files from eDelivery. They go to do their install, and they get about a little bit through the install, and they get this error, couldn't open file temp partition -include. Now, when we see this, here's what we're going to tell you. Yes, I know you downloaded 3 files. Yes, I know the 3 files had extensions of .iso, but you can't actually install from those .isos. You have to take the 3 files and combine them into one unified .iso file. You may ask back, Russ, why on earth would you make me download 3 files and put them together? Why didn't you just put it up there as one file? Well, there's limitations into how big the file can be, and we still have customers with networks that aren't the greatest. Downloading a 12 gig file can be challenging for some people, so we did break it up so you could get different pieces of it. But if you read the instructions, chapter 1.2 of the installation guide, step 13 says, after you've downloaded the 3 files, combine the 3 files into one ISO file, and then it goes on to give you the commands to do that. So again, if you're playing with this, and you know, hopefully you are, especially if you're a current user, when you download the install media, do make sure you go out and combine the 3 files into one, at which point you will find it's a very easy install to do. Okay, let's just take a quick look at Audit Vault and Database Firewall, you know, functionality. Won't spend too long with that. One of the main uses for Audit Vault and Database Firewall is audit data collection. You may be doing that because you want to track privileged user activity. You may be doing it because you want to do data governance on before and after. You may be working on some compliance reports, but for whatever reason, you need to centralize your audit data. When you do that, here's kind of the path we expect you to follow. First thing you're going to do, you've installed Audit Vault and Database Firewall. You're going to configure your targets that you're going to work with, what databases you want to monitor. You'll install agents on the servers for those databases, or you'll use a remote agent. That's a possibility too. You'll set up audit data collection, you know, so you can go in and grab that information in. You'll configure your data retention policy. I want to keep so many months online, so many months in archive, and now you've got data to work with, or you've got everything set up to begin collecting data. Within the database, you'll configure your audit policies. Who do I want to audit? What do I want to audit? When do I want those audit records to be collected? Where does the audit date, where are the audit records going to reside? Then you're going to go through, now that you've got all of that information done, what reports do I need? Do I need to generate alerts? Do I want to schedule reports to be emailed to someone? That's kind of the process you flow. At the end of the day, what you've got is a automated collection of audit data that brings that data into your warehouse, and you're now ready to go out and begin doing that reporting and alerting. As you're configuring what you're going to audit, another new feature in Audit Vault Database Firewall 20 is the ability to control unified audit policies. Previous versions worked with the older version of auditing because unified auditing was fairly new when 12.2 was released. But unified auditing is now mainstream. We've already deprecated traditional auditing. We'll obsolete it in the next long-term release of the database. And so Audit Vault and Database Firewall gives you the ability to easily enable or disable policies, see what's enabled or disabled, and also to do things like saying, I want to audit everything that Bob does, or I want to add logon events, or I want to add in logging for CIS configuration. Lots of things you can do with that. We already talked about data collection and how we can, from a single screen, retrieve audit policies, user entitlements, and do stored procedure signatures. Don't forget, those are now schedulable. So if you're a current user and you've got a manual process where you go in every Monday and collect that data, you don't have to do that anymore. Just schedule it and you're off to the races. For the database firewall, we talked about blocking. We talked a little bit about database firewall. Database firewall can be used to monitor traffic over the network. It can also sometimes be used to block. I'll talk more about that in just a second. But generally what you're doing with firewall is you're either trying to collect information on what's happening in the database with minimal or no impact on the database server, because firewall happens outside of the database, or you're trying to do certain levels of control of who gets to the database or is able to run certain commands, or maybe you're trying to generate alerts or block SQL injection. When you're doing this, when you deploy your firewall, you have 3 potential deployment modes. And which one you use is going to depend upon what your goal is, what you're trying to do. Those 3 modes are network sniffer mode. This is the most common. This is where database firewall is simply monitoring network traffic, and that network traffic is sent to the database firewall, perhaps by a span port off of a switch. Perhaps you have a packet replicator, something like a Gigamon. Perhaps you've just put the database firewall on the same network segment as the database, and you're allowed to see the traffic that way. But one way or another, the database firewall is able to see the same packets that are reaching the database and bring those packets in and parse them and put its information into the Audit Vault repository. Network sniffer mode. Host monitor, moving one step up. This is a specialized implementation of network sniffer. You can't always find a spare span port on a switch. You can't always put the database firewall on the same subnet as the database. And not everybody has those expensive Gigamon packet replicators. So we allow you to put an agent on the database server. And what the agent is basically doing is a long-running TCP dump where it's filtering for database traffic. And as the agent, the host monitor, sees this traffic come in, it forwards that traffic to the database firewall for analysis and reporting. Third mode is proxy. The database firewall acts as a SQL proxy server. You can configure clients to talk to the firewall and configure firewall to forward requests onto the database server. If you are in proxy mode, because traffic actually flows through the firewall, you can both monitor and block. So if your goal is to stop something from getting to the database, you're always going to choose proxy mode. If your goal is to monitor, you can do proxy, host monitor, or network sniffer, depending upon what you're trying to do and the architecture you're working with. On premises, by far the most common mode we see is network sniffer. Proxy is sometimes used, but network sniffer is a lot more common. In the cloud, by far the most common that we see is either proxy or host monitor, because it's really hard to get sniffers running in the cloud. So again, your architecture determines which deployment mode you're going to use. Once you've got your deployment mode, now it's time to begin building your policies. First step in building the policies is to identify the actors. What do you have to work with? What IP addresses are connecting to your database? What database users are logging in? What OS users do those database users log in as in their workstations or their servers? What client programs are they running? You take these factors and you put them together into something called a profile that says, usually when Russ logs in running SQL Developer from this workstation as the operating user Russ, okay? Once you know that, you look at their actions. What do? Are they viewing data? Are they updating data? Are they deleting data? Do I want to look at things just at the command level? Do I want to look at it at the database table level? Do I want to go down to individual SQL statements when I create my policy? So what actions am I going to work with my policy? And the combination of actors and actions are what I use to configure my risk settings. What do I want to happen when someone logs in as Russ who's not coming from the right profile? Do I want to log it? Maybe it goes down to the Audit Vault server. Do I want to warn about it, send out an alert? Do I want to block it? If I'm going to consider this something I need to warn for, what threat level do I assign it? Is it a minor threat, a major threat, a critical threat? And if you think about this type of idea of warn, block, minor, major, critical, this is so we can integrate, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, with something like an enterprise SIEM, okay? Firewall, again, lets you monitor database activity with no impact on the database server, so that you're very easily able to create an allow list of what gets through, and anything that's not in that allow list you block. It also allows you to enforce trusted path based on attributes like IP address, client program, database user. Now, usually when we talk trusted path, we're talking about database vault. Well, Firewall does similar capabilities to Database Vault if you're inline blocking, but unlike Database Vault, Database Firewall works with Oracle, with SQL Server, with DB2, with MySQL, with Sybase, and so you can get Database Vault-like functionality, particularly around trusted path, without actually having to have Database Vault. We can set up policies at the individual SQL command level. We can put up policies that look at different database objects. You can do just about anything with Firewall policies, okay? One of the big uses that you'll get out of your Audit Vault and Firewall server is reporting, and there are an enormous variety of reports to work with. So if you go to the Reports tab, you will see dozens and dozens of reports that you can run on all the activity that's come in, Linux sudo activity, individual firewall reports. You can pull up summary reports that talk about kind of aggregate information, what's happened in terms of trends and anomalies. You can pull up compliance reports for many of the common compliance frameworks, including GDPR, SOX, PCI, and this is extensible. You can add in other frameworks if you want to. You can schedule reports to go out either in PDF or spreadsheet form. You can save reports for later review. You can schedule reports. You can do all kinds of stuff with reporting. I'd mentioned enterprise deployment features. We now integrate with Active Directory or with an LDAP server, and we work with LDAP groups as well. So you can have a user who is a member of the auditor group or a user who's a member of the admin group, and Audit Vault and Database Firewall will know that when they log in because they're able to select their group. Unlike local users, you can actually have a user who is a member of both admin and auditor, and they just choose which group they want to use during any particular login, because you can be members of multiple groups. For third-party integration with things like a SIEM or Splunk, we support two methods. One method is where we push information to the third-party system. We do that via syslog. The other method is where we allow that third-party system to log into Audit Vault and Database Firewall and pull information. Which one is right for you depends upon your monitoring goals. A lot of SIEMs and Splunk, and a lot of times, charges per kilobyte, so you only want to send alerts, the most important stuff to the SIEM. A lot of times, maybe you have an enterprise agreement and you're not worried about the amount of data. You want it to pull everything for better correlation. We've already talked about lifecycle management, the ability to copy to secure copy or SMB or an NFS, and the ability to do automated archiving, which really happy to see that one. We didn't talk much about high availability. There's no change in what we do here from older versions of Audit Vault and Database Firewall. The Audit Vault server itself, that data warehouse, you can have a primary and a standby. The underlying technology for that is Oracle Data Guard. For the firewall, if you are in monitoring mode, in other words, if you're not in line, you can do high availability using something called a resilient pair, where one of the firewalls is up all the time and another one just sits there in standby. If the primary goes down, the secondaries comes up. If you are in line, if you're in proxy mode, you can do high availability 2 different ways. One of them is to front the firewall proxies with a load balancer, which handles load balancing and failover. The other is to use client-side load balancing and failover. Oracle clients especially, in your connect string, you can say, connect to this address. If it fails, connect to that address. So that's just built into your client connection. That takes us to the end. I want to give you one more reminder. If you're going to upgrade this month or next month, or if you're going to install new this month or next month, please take a note of this email address. Send us an email, let us know. We want to make sure that this very first 6 or 7 weeks with Audit Vault and Database Firewall, that you don't get frustrated learning lessons that other people are learning, and that we're aware quickly if we need to fix something, okay? So we've covered a ton of information here. We talked about native database auditing. We talked about new features in Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20. We took a lightning fast run through the reports and some of the capabilities around on-premises and cloud deployments. And that really takes us to the end. Before we go back and review questions, just a quick note. Next month, the second Thursday of the month is the 10th of September, and our topic will be using DataSafe to secure databases on premises.